Hey everybody, we're here to talk about Edge of Eternity draft archetypes. We're going to be ranking them based on how powerful they are, how much fun they are to play, and also how easy they are in the draft portion to make sure that you get a well above average deck. The first archetype we're going to talk about is Azorius. This is blue-white, and this is the second spell tempo deck. This is a deck where you're going to be playing a lot of low to the ground spells. We're going to be playing a lot of 2 drops and 3 drops so that when you get to turn 5, instead of playing 1 card per turn, you're going to be playing 2 cards as much as possible. A lot of their cards have triggers that make the effect bigger or make it a better effect if you have already cast another spell on this turn. And so you're going to need to draw more cards because you're not going to be able to rely on just 1 draw per turn. If you're playing a land and playing a spell, obviously you're going to need to kind of refill your hand. So it's a little bit harder to draft since you're going to need to prioritize card draw, but you're also going to need to prioritize that defensive speed that sits on the board and make sure that you don't get overrun while you're building up your team to be able to attack. This case scenario, attack mostly through the air. So it's an easier path to victory once you have things set up, but you can't get overrun, and that defensive speed is going to be a big deal there. Still, I'm going to put this in an A tier. This is a fun archetype to play. A little bit more strategy in the draft portion than usual, but I think if you try it, you'll really enjoy it. The second one that we're going to talk about is Demir. This is blue-black, and this is an artifact control deck. You really want to have that mass of artifacts so that you can guarantee yourself to have some on every game. You really need between 8 and 10. And really, if you want to be solidly in artifacts, you really want to get kind of more than 10, right? 10 to 12 or so. So while you're drafting, this needs to be thought of. The deck can fall behind early if you don't have the right cards, if you don't have the early removal spells. So while I do think this deck is powerful and I think the deck is fun, I am going to put it in the B tier since it is a little bit harder to draft. Black-red is a deck where I've heard a lot of differing opinions right now. Most people believe that it is a powerful deck, but if you don't have that explosive start, it may be inconsistent. So this is another deck, and again, please hear me as I'm repeating myself, that is going to be relying on 2 drops and 3 drops, earlier, lower in the curve cards. And so these are the cards that are going to be drying up faster. And if you have a chance to draft them, you need to prioritize them and take them early. So the Void and Sacrifice deck, Void is really fun. You're just getting a little bit of benefit for either having lost one of your creatures or killing one of your opponent's creatures. We're going to put this in a B tier. The next deck we have is red-green. This is your standard landfall deck, except in green you have a lot of cards that make lander tokens, and a lander token can be sacrificed with 2 additional mana to go search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped, right? So you can make landfall at instant speed if you need to, or you can make more than 1 landfall trigger happen on a given turn. The deck is very aggressive, and if you can get out to an early start and keep the pressure on, you can certainly rack up some wins with this deck. I'm going to put this deck over in the A tier as well. The next deck we're going to talk about is green-white. This is the +1/+1 counters deck. I've heard it described as a snowball deck, a deck that once you get the synergies to start appearing, that they kind of take over, and you're now putting +1/+1 counters on multiple times. It is weak to some removal, especially blue removal for bounce, where once you've spent all this time building +1/+1 counters onto a certain creature, that creature gets bounced, and then you have to play it again and kind of reset. But if you have the time to get your cards onto the battlefield and start building them up over subsequent turns, this is a really powerful deck. Because green is very strong in this format, and it is giving you the ability to splash other colors with those lander tokens, I am going to put this deck in the S tier. I think this is a great deck to get into, and I think it's great for beginners to get into as well. So I'm going to put it in the S tier. The next is the white-black go wide strategy of Orzhov. I think this is a really good deck for beginners. White and black have a lot of removal. You usually tend to win these games by either amassing a huge board that can swing around your opponents, or by using the flyers that are in both white and black to chip in for the last points of damage. If you fall behind on this deck, you are going to get run over. Your creatures tend to be smaller than other decks' creatures, and so if you don't have cards out by turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, if you don't have 2 creatures out by the beginning of turn 4, you do run a big risk of being run over. So for that reason, while I do think it's fun and I do think it's powerful, I am going to have to kind of penalize it a little bit and move it over here into the B tier. The next deck is blue-red artifact deck, and this is definitely a explosive aggro artifact where you can kill really fast. It is highly synergistic, and so it is harder to draft than maybe some of the other decks. I think it's going to be really interesting to see coming from Final Fantasy, where blue-red was all about the mages and it was overdrafted. I think people may start shying away from blue-red a little bit, only because without that really tight synergy, it is a harder deck to pilot. So for those reasons, while I know that they do have powerful starts, I am going to rank it a little bit lower. I am going to put it in this C category. Black-green is a graveyard reanimator style deck where you're playing mostly mid-range and you're building up cards into your graveyard, and then you use those cards as kind of a value engine. It is slower to set up than some of the other decks, but if you play it as, fair mid-range Magic, and then the graveyard eventually fills up on its own, you can certainly trade off 1-for-1 against most of your opponent's cards, and then have your finishers later on. Slow to set up, and you do need the enablers, but it also is powerful later game. Most of this video I've been talking about the speed of the format and talking about how you really need to get out to the board early. I think the same thing is applying here. You need to have those creatures out, but you have the advantage of winning when you trade off creatures, where some of your opponents won't have that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this deck up in the A tier. Red-white is an interesting deck. It's a space station tapped creature synergy deck, where not only are your aggressive cards going to be tapping because they are attacking every turn, if you do play some of the larger space station cards and you're bringing out cards that don't have haste, you're normally tapping them on the first turn to put station counters on your spaceships to turn those into creatures also. It's a fun deck, but I do think that newer players might have the ratio that they need off on this deck. I think players may have too many of the spaceship cards that need to be stationed, and so for that reason I am going to put it lower. So I'm going to put it in the C rank. And blue-green, this is a ramp deck where you can certainly splash a lot of colors. Most of the time in blue-green, you can splash whatever bombs you open. So if you are solidly into blue-green in the first pack, no matter what you open in pack 2 and pack 3, you're going to be able to get there. The lander tokens, make sure that you can have access to a third or fourth color of mana, and you just need to make sure that you have that defensive speed. Once again, make sure that you're putting creatures out on turn 2, on turn 3 to fight against the aggro nature of some of the other decks. Here I'm going to put the green-blue deck in the S tier. One thing I think is really important when you look at the top ranking decks here, you see a lot of green. This is some place where you want to be early on in drafts when you don't know what your other colors are going to be. Green gives you the flexibility to not only have one secondary color, but also splash into a third color, possibly a fourth color. You can't go wrong with early picks in green in this format. That said, I would love to hear your opinions. Edge of Eternities has been out on Magic Arena for about a week, so these are early rankings, and I would love to hear your comments. If you like content like this, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the algorithm serve us to other audiences, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you, everybody.